Blaming, self-punishment, blaming oneself, blaming another, self-punishment, punishing others, righteous anger, judgment, judging oneself, judging God, judging the world, and judging an other or a group. Taking personal responsibility, asking others to take responsibility, asking the world to take responsibility, an other to take responsibility, asking God to take responsibility. So, in the course of our cultural existence, we blame, we feel superior, we feel inferior, we criticize, we righteously criticize from a superior position. We criticize ourselves from an inferior position. And what I want to look at is the uses of each of these different positions and when to apply them. So let's first look at responsibility, the ability and the willingness to respond. Now, typically when we say, who's responsible? It's because something is wrong. And of course, anyone in the vicinity is responsible, meaning they're able to respond to one degree or another. Just because someone lit the match that started the fire does not mean that that person is the only one able or willing to respond to put out the fire. One person could have lit the match to start the fire. Another person could have made that room particularly flammable. Another person could have built the house out of wood, and another person could have not helped upkeep the fire extinguisher, and another person could have buried the faulty fire extinguisher under a pile of wood. And another person disabled the fire alarm, and another person chose to put the cabin out in the wilderness far away, and other people watched this happen, and other people had water and saw a blaze and chose not to check it out. And every single one of these people, certainly those present, is able and willing to respond in some degree. Let's get safety. Let's get away from this. Let's put buckets of water. Let's find a garden hose. And if no one responds and the house burns down, then everyone who was able to respond is a participant. I could have gone and checked out what was going on. I didn't feel like it because, I was enjoying the kiss with my girlfriend. I could have done this, but I was afraid I would be blamed, so I ran away. I could have done this when I heard the sound for help, but I thought someone else would do it. And I could have done it, but I said it's not my problem. I didn't respond. And so, in the situation of pain, there is pain present in the space. There's pain present. Can I respond? How? Can I respond to reduce the unnecessary suffering? Someone's curtains are on fire. Obviously, I can't save the curtain, but could I throw some water to save the house? There's going to be suffering about the curtain, but not half as much suffering as if the entire house goes down. Could I, if I light the match, rather than run away for fear of being found out about the curtains, could I call for help? Could I respond? And in a healthy cultural environment that is governed by empathy, one responds in the principle of who's in the most pain, how can I help? Who's in the most pain, how can I help? And so there's a response dynamic that is empathy-based. Obviously, if someone's house is about to or going to burn down, in an empathic, intelligent cult or culture, everyone runs and gets water and tries to put out the fire. And the fire people come as soon as they can and all that. So if you can competently, confidently reduce the pain that you or someone else feels, typically there is a tendency to do that. Who's in the most pain? How can I help? And so we have responsibility. Now, everyone in the history of humanity wants to feel good, wants to feel better, and wants to avoid feeling worse. And typically, the complex machinations of human behavior and patterns in some way tie in with that objective. Now, it's complicated because the ego is so frightened of the unknown, is so frightened of change, is so frightened of pain in the venture into the unknown and terrain that there's tremendous hesitancy to let go of certain painful patterns of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. Because if you let go of that identity, that pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, then yes, your pain goes down, but you're now in the unknown. You're now facing something you cannot predict. And if your fear of the unknown, your terror of trauma lurking in the unknown, is bigger than the pain of your dysfunctional identity, you will cling to the known dysfunction, the devil you know, for fear of the devil you don't know. In other words, you will feel better repeating an endless loop of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that's very uncomfortable. But it's not terrifying because it's known. You will feel better doing something that you understand and are familiar with that is miserable than you would facing the unknown, and the terror you have in the belief. Because one of the reasons Einstein talked about the question, or purportedly talked about the question, that the single most important question one can ask is the universe a friendly place? Because if you say, no, it is not, the universe is 99.99999% bigger than me, which means that in any conflict I lose, because the universe is bigger. And if the universe is not friendly and is a billion times bigger than me, then my best strategy is to hide, to lie, to avoid exposure to anything uncomfortable or big or unknown, because it's likely to be threatening. And so you don't want to risk change in any way. Now, if you say, yes, the universe is a friendly place, and it's 99.9% bigger than me, then anytime you have the opportunity to be visible, to be known, you're going to expose yourself. Here I am, because who doesn't want a friend who's 99.9% bigger than you are? Everyone does. And so when the universe is a friendly place, you talk to strangers. You go out and meet people. You travel the world. You learn new things. You read new books, because every one of those things takes you into the unknown. And you venture into the unknown in search of a new friend, in search of how's the universe trying to help me today. And you find out, oh, this helped me in this way, and this helped me, because there is a frame, because everything is in polarity. In a dualistic paradigm, everything has polarity. Everything has a plus and a negative side. And beliefs tend to be self-perpetuating because attention is very narrow and the world is very big. And we like to affirm our beliefs. And so if we believe that the universe is a friendly place, we tend to take the narrow laser beam of present moment attention and turn it to the areas where we can see benefit, because they're there. And if we believe that the universe is an unfriendly place, we tend to take the narrow beam of present consciousness and turn it in a pattern that reveals the sinister nature of the universe, because it's there. Birth and death are simultaneous. When a caterpillar turns into a butterfly, the caterpillar dies, the butterfly is born. Now, because we like butterflies, we talk about this as a great event. But if we talked about loving the caterpillar, we might see this as a tragedy. The caterpillar was just happily living his life. And suddenly, out of nowhere, the predatory nature of a winged beast immersed itself in the chrysalis, consumed the caterpillar, and took over his body. Watch out, caterpillar, the butterflies are coming. Let's hide. Let's see. Maybe you should commit suicide, because it's better than being possessed. And to the person who believes that, all the evidence is there. And to the person who says this is a moment of transcendence, of magnificence, all the evidence is there. Just what do you look at from what angle? So if you can respond, typically, to create more sustainable well-being, and you know how to, you do it. In other words, every human being is using their present operating system with a lot of heritable patterns, a lot of heritage, and some innovation. Meaning, if you've gone through your life effectively, you've adopted and absorbed your mother's family system, your father's family system, taken it all in, you've seen what doesn't work about it, the hypocrisy, the stupidity, the ignorance, etc., and you've rebelled. You've gone into antithesis, sympathy, antipathy. You're in adolescence, and this is all shit, and you throw it all out. And after the extremity of your rebellion, you move towards synthesis, the adult stage, where you say, cornflakes are good, but being yelled at for spilling milk, I don't like that world. So I'm going to keep the cornflakes as I have a child, and I'll give my child cornflakes, but I'm not going to yell at them when they spill their milk. I'm going to keep the idea that education is good, but so much of the curriculum in my education was just BS. The history of bridges, algebra. Where's learning to drive, learning to cook, learning to kiss well for the first time? Let's have a healthy education that, teaches useful practical skills in daily life, like how to apply for a resume, or how to open a bank account, or how to resell, how to sell a product effectively and with good ethics. I want to learn those things. So I'm going to send my child to education. I'm just going to actually teach them useful things rather than absurd things. And so that's how I'm going to iterate. Sympathy, antipathy, synthesis. The best of the system, throw out the worst of the system, iterate and create something new. And you have evolution, you have life. And so if you go through this process, you are responding. You're responding to the situation as a child, and you need to accept what's there and learn the language of everyone else. You're responding to the pain and the dysfunction of every system that's flawed and rebelling against it. And then you're responding to the fact that complete and utter rebellion of everyone and everything for all reasons, because in a healthy teenager, everything is fucked up and everyone is fucked up and da-da-da. And that's part of antithesis. But you can't just throw out the entire culture, the entire diet, the entire road system, the entire monetary system and work. So the adults is then the synthesis, the balancing, and saying, my adolescent has some good points here. Let's get rid of the corruption and the lies and this, but let's keep this and this, and let's make it new. Let's create a new iteration. So this is also responsibility, the ability, the willingness to respond and make things better. But, it's complicated because even though we all want to feel good and avoid feeling bad, if we're terrified of the unknown, we will sometimes use our power, ability, to reinforce what's bad to avoid the unknown of our horror, of our fear. And so we look at it and say, why are they staying with that person? Or why do they keep eating that food that makes them fat? It's familiar. The word family, familiar, is the safety of what's known. My mom was fat and poor. Her mom was fat and poor. But I know that. I understand that world. I know the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. That is my mother. Now, it's not a very good pattern. But if I throw that out, if I let that go, I'm in the unknown. And I don't have any experience forming a new identity, a new pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. What if I make a mistake? What if I'm outcast the way I was threatened to be outcast when I rebelled in my teenage years and my parents threatened to throw me out of the house and hate me and that I would fail and all kinds of horrible things would happen to me if I followed my own instincts. So I better just do what everyone else is doing. So if you can respond and if you have the courage and the belief system that says that change and the unknown is good, if I can respond to create things being directly better, this is what you do. Now, when you've got, a 3-foot fire and a bucket of water, you can respond and put out the fire. But when a forest fire, 5 miles wide, at 3,000 degrees, is moving towards you at 20 miles an hour, you cannot respond. And unless you run, unless you get out of the way of that fire, you die. Unless you make it into the lake, unless you respond by not putting out the fire, but getting out of the way, you will die. And so the healthy response, if one can respond, if one knows how to, is to respond and put out the fire, be that fire the fire of emotional pain, the fire of one's partner's trauma, the fire of one's child screaming because bicycle ran over their toe. You can put out the fire. When the fire is too big, you've got to give the responsibility to the group, to the cult, to the culture. Say, hey, we need helicopters. We need the military. We need bulldozers to plow us path. I can't respond. This is too much for me. The weight is too heavy for one person. I've got to give it back. Now, in dysfunctional cults, there's something that goes on called passing the buck or scapegoating. And in this situation, it doesn't matter whether one person can respond or not. What matters is that it's their fault. There's an assignment of blame. And so, you started the fire, so you put it out. Why should we solve your problem? Now, your problem may be way too big for you to solve, but it's your problem. So you have a dissociative pattern. Now, in truth, everything at some level is our problem. as a community, as a culture. Because even if we raise dysfunctional people who create problems, and then we say, no, it's all their problem, it's a problem that we as a cult produce dysfunctional people who create problems. Because that's not natural. That's not human nature to create unnecessary suffering. You have to have cultural dysfunction in the programming, in the messages given to children to create a certain percentage of self-destructive or highly destructive people towards the group. That is a cultural problem. So you can own anything as a group and you can own anything as an individual. Because if you say, well, that's their problem, if they're the majority and they're ruining your life, it's your problem. And it's not just that they don't have the intelligence to respond. You don't have the intelligence to teach them the intelligence to respond intelligently. So the responsibility basically is always there. Every single person who has information can respond. And they can either respond by taking action to mitigate the suffering of themselves and other people, or they can take action that concentrates or diffuses the suffering. So if you lack the competency to eliminate a certain amount of suffering, you can share the suffering or you can concentrate the suffering. And in highly empathic cultures, the suffering is distributed as evenly as possible within the group. In highly sociopathic cultures, the suffering is scapegoated. It's concentrated into a couple of individuals. And this somewhat ties in with the bias, like in more Eastern cultures, the focus is on the group and the family. If the individual does something wrong, the entire family is shamed, and the entire family responds to reduce the shame. And so the group is both blamed for what happens in the individual and responds. In highly individual situations, in highly individualistic cultures like the United States, the individual is blamed and shamed for what they do. The family is exonerated and all of that for the most part, and is usually blamed and said, you deal with this. And if the individual happens to be successful, then the individual is exonerated. Again, in more Eastern cultures, it tends to be the family is given standing because the individual made a great accomplishment, and the family's status is lifted. So if you do not have the competency, to make the pain better and increase the abundance and increase the well-being, if you lack that competency, then the pain will continue. Now, at some point, the pain gets to be too big. It gets louder and louder and louder, and it gets to be too big. At some point, the pain becomes unbearable. It becomes too loud. Now, at this point, the nerve endings, the receptors, the processors that are telling you something's going wrong so that you can respond, become themselves the problem. Because at a certain point in pain, you cannot function because you're in too much pain. And in this dynamic, you have to turn to anesthetics. Because if you don't turn to anesthetics, you will be in too much pain to respond. So what are the anesthetics that help us when the pain gets too big? So number one is dissociation. This is the part of me in pain. I disown that part. You're in pain. I have nothing to do with you. You're in pain. Go away. You're in pain. I'm leaving. So you have dissociation as the first form of pain management. Dissociation of the environment, dissociation of the thought, dissociation of the person, of the family, of the country. This is painful, I'm out of here. So we have dissociation through distance or denial or attention. Now, the other form of dissociation is through inferiority or superiority. Because when you're equal, there's a lot of intimacy. When you're equal, there's a lot of presence and intimacy. But when you're better than or less than, you've got distance. And so if I can, I hurt you, and I could be with you in the pain, but that feels too painful. I'm a wretch, I'm a bad person. I get lost in myself, in my self-absorption, in my self-punishment. Now, you're still hurting because I'm not with you. But I'm not there with you. I'm busy hurting myself. I'm bad, I'm blah, blah, blah. So I can dissociate from something I don't know how to respond to because we're in a relationally illiterate culture. So I don't know how to respond to you in pain. You don't know how to respond to me in pain. We don't know how to respond to each other in pain. And so the pain doesn't get better. But we don't want to feel the helplessness of that, so we just beat ourselves up and get self-absorbed. Oh, I'm such a wretch of this and that. And it's like, hello, I didn't ask for all your self-punishment. I asked you to be with me in this pain. And so I make myself inferior and thus separate from you. Because now you're superior, I'm inferior. Oh, I'm such a wretch, I'm such a wretch. And in the worst case scenario, I'm even asking the person in pain to try and lift me up. I'm bad, I'm bad. No, you're not bad for hurting me. Yes, I'm so bad. And distracting the person from their pain. Or I say, I'm superior, you dumb putz. Of course you're too sensitive. That's the problem. I just did this, and look at you. You did this and you did that. You're so sensitive. You should have done this. You should have understood that. I meant this. And so I'm going to blame myself. I'm going to blame you. Now, blame is an anesthetic because reality is on an evolutionary curve, happening as intelligently as it can within the paradigm of human consciousness and cult consciousness at this particular moment. As intelligently as it can. And in 1,000 years, it'll be better. And 1,000 years ago, it was worse in some area or other. Life is evolving as intelligently as it can. And this is what it is. Now, when what is too painful, the gap between what's happening and what I want to happen is too big, that's called pain. I want this, but I have this, and it's so far apart. Then we have things like should. And what we're doing is we're replacing the reality that is because it's so painful relative to what we want. So painful. We're saying what should be. As soon as you say you should have done that and you should have done this, you have a distraction from what is, so that mitigates the pain. But you're also lecturing, you're saying you're better than God, basically. You're saying you're better than life and better than the universe because you know what should have happened. What should have happened is this. What happened was this, but I'm not going to focus on what did happen. What should have happened is this and this and this and this. And I'm going to demand that life catches up and gets with my program. Because life had this in mind, but it should have had this in mind. And I'm better than life, and I'm going to tell life how it's wrong, and I'm right. And I'm going to punish life and rebel and attack until life agrees to be with my plan. You want to be my wife, you want to be my lover, you want to be my friend. Well, you did this, but you should have done this. And I am not going to accept it. I'm going to demand and hold out it is like this, and it's like this, and okay, now I accept you because you're doing things the way you should do them. Now this is the child, the inner child, because the child is completely and utterly dependent on the grown-ups around, and desperately needs, their needs to be met: survival, security, love and belonging, etc. And so if those are not being met very well, it's a catastrophe for the child. They may not survive. And so, the tantrum, etc., you've got to you're responsible for meeting my needs. And you should do this and you should do that, and the child does not relax until someone meets its needs. And the adolescent also has opinions about hypocrisy and and what's faulty, and this should be like that, and there shouldn't be lies and shouldn't be corruption and all that. So the adolescent has their sense as well. But the adult is present with what is. This is happening. And this is how I respond. This is going on. And this is how I respond. And if this makes it worse, I'm going to do something else that makes it better. And then makes it better, and then makes it better. Responsibility is power. It's freedom. And competent responses improve sustainable well-being. Incompetent responses, make sustainable well-being worse. And so this is what needs, in evolutionary terms, as we move towards competence and responsibility, we move towards maturity, we move towards grace. Until such time when we are incompetent or in too much pain, we move towards anesthetics. Now, once you numb out, it can go one of two ways. You're now numb, so you can function. With your dissociative, sociopathic numbness to the pain, you can now make the pain worse and not know it because you're numb. It's like chewing on your tooth or your cheek with Novocaine in your mouth. You don't feel that you're chewing on your cheek, but you are, and pain wears off and it's bleeding because you damaged it when you were numb. So you can become numb and really hurt your marriage and really hurt your body and do this and do that and not feel any of it until the numbness wears off, and then you realize just how much damage you've done while you were numb. So that's one possibility. The other possibility is I'm going numb so that I can do something better, so that I can do something I can't do in excruciating pain, so that I can improve my life, so that by the time the pain wears off, I'm in less pain because I took action. And this is the benefit of an anesthetic, even though the should is kind of a rejection of life, even though we are neither superior or inferior to others, even though blaming and judgment is based on lies. Because when we blame one person, we pretend that that person is an isolated individual, and they are not. They are part of an ecological framework. So if you blame the person, you have to blame the cult that produces that statistic of people. In other words, in highly materialistic, chauvinistic, and narcissistic cultures, you raise a certain percentage of highly materialistic, narcissistic people. Now, if you then blame an individual for being narcissistic and materialistic, and do not make the connection and understand that they're one of many, they're one of a majority in a culture that raises that, it's first of all ineffective, because while you're busy blaming the last generation, the next generation is being raised by the same cult dynamics to be exactly the same way. So you're fighting a losing battle for one thing. But the other thing is you're putting all the power on the individual when in fact the cult holds a tremendous amount of influence on the majority of people who are largely unconscious participants in perpetuating the cult dynamic. But blame can be very useful if the pain is too big and you just need to anesthetize and judge, and say, basically, I'm better than you, I know better, this is how it should be. So, in summary, if you can take a response that makes things sustainably better for you and the larger ecology, do so. If other people can respond to make things better for you and the larger community, ask them to respond. Ask them to respond. If they cannot respond and you cannot respond, if they will not respond and you will not respond, and subsequently the pain rises higher and higher to a point where you cannot function because the pain is too high, then take painkillers of judgment, self-blame, inferiority, superiority, blaming others, and righteously criticizing yourself and others. Go at it. Understanding that as the anesthetic of dissociation and righteousness and all of that comes on, in that space you can either get functioning and start learning within the reprieve of a painkiller, or you can do a lot more damage without understanding you're doing damage because you've numbed out the tremendous amount of pain that you are in and are participating in. Because when you understand reality outside the dogma of your culture, you understand that there are no observers in the culture, only participants. Which means that we are a participant by default in the damage that our culture does, in the damage that we do through living the cult architecture. And that it is ours to respond, to create a micro-culture that is superior to the dynamics of the cult.